So imagine a world parliament. Imagine 193 voices gathering together in New York to deliberate over matters of peace and security. The United Nations was established in 1945 with the signatory of 50 countries for the express purpose of preventing the outbreak of war and averting a world war. The United Nations has many parts to it. It deals, for instance, with matters of economics and social policy. It deals with matters of human rights. It deals with matters of culture. But the most important parts of the UN are the Security Council, which has 5 permanent members who are responsible for controlling its policy. These are France, Britain, the United States, China, and Russia. The other body that is very important is where all the nations meet and come together, and that is the General Assembly. Both the General Assembly and the Security Council pass what are called resolutions to make policy for the world. The UN has been responsible for eradicating polio in Africa, for instance, of dealing with problems of debt or problems of other diseases spreading. The UN has been very important in making sure that human rights are observed. The most famous document is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which has been ratified and kept by many countries. The UN, precisely because it's so complex, is determined to make sure that everything is done towards a big picture of peace and trying to make sure that humanity attains the primary purpose of what it says, that we believe. We believe in a better future.
In 2015, the United Nations turned 70. Since World War II, the UN has existed to foster communication between its member states to achieve global goals, which would be impossible individually. So how do they do this? How exactly does the UN work? Well, the UN is divided into 6 main parts. The first is the General Assembly, which includes nearly all internationally recognized countries, making up 193 member states. The Assembly meets annually in September and debates issues on security and diplomacy. In 2015, the major topic is climate change and helping developing countries face the threat of global warming. Within the General Assembly, resolutions relating to defense, as well as administrative issues like new membership and budget, require a 2/3 vote. Most other issues only need a majority. Every country, regardless of size, gets a single vote. However, there are 2 states in the UN which are not actual members: the Vatican, whose government is called the Holy See, and Palestine. These are called permanent non-member observer states, and while they can't vote, they are allowed to take part in debates. The second arm of the UN is the Security Council. It exists to prevent conflict on a large scale, promoting peace through diplomacy or sanctions. It only has 5 permanent members: Russia, France, China, the UK, and the US. Russia, France, China, the UK, and the US. Russia, France, China, the UK, and the US, which were all winning powers in World War II. The permanent members have veto power, and their use has been incredibly controversial. The US, for example, has vetoed dozens of resolutions against Israel for their actions in the Middle East. There are 10 more members representing Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Western Europe. Those 10 are elected on a rolling basis every 2 years to make sure that major world regions have representation. The Security Council's resolutions are carried out by the UN's peacekeeping force, which boasts about 100,000 soldiers. One of the most important parts of the UN is the Economic and Social Council, which works to improve standards of living and promote human rights. Most of what the UN actually does is centered around helping developing countries. The Council works with specialized agencies like the World Health Organization and High Commission for Refugees to make that happen. The judicial arm of the UN is the International Court of Justice. This is where international law violations are debated and prosecuted, although countries with significant power can often refuse to comply with their decisions. The 5th arm of the UN is actually not operational. The Trusteeship Council was created in the 1940s to help developing territories and dependencies become independent countries. The council was suspended in 1994 after helping more than 70 countries gain independence. And finally, the Secretariat is essentially the internal administrative workings of the UN. Although the UN exists to promote global cooperation, many have criticized the greater influence of the 5 permanent Security Council members. Still, the UN has seen incredible advancement in fighting hunger, poverty, and child mortality. Without communication and cooperation, the world would be considerably worse.